Hi, and welcome to another episode of Megan's Study Guide for the NBE. For this episode, I'm going to be diving back into the much requested conferences official study guide for the NBE. We are going to cover the section for funeral directing, which is unfortunately, I'm sorry, it's going to sound a lot like the Quizlets that we've gone over and the Kahoots, because that's probably where they pulled it from. But at least now it'll be in one recording. It'll be easy to digest, and it will be the definitions the conference wants, right? So if you have the conference study guide, we are going to be starting on page 58. Now, I will say it is 11 o'clock my time. I have been doing multiple of these episodes because my podcast thing renews tomorrow, so I don't have to pay like crazy amounts for like extra hours. So I'm trying to pump as many of these out as possible so that y'all can have these for your exams. That's kind of why I took a little pause for the cause. So bear with me. I can hear my voice. So anywho, all right, let's get this. I'm going to do this, hopefully get through it. It's a few pages, so let's do this, all right? So, funeral directing. I'm sure a lot of you know these, okay? Acknowledgement cards. Those are thank you cards. Acolyte. That is an altar attendant. Adaptive funeral rite. A funeral rite that is adjusted to the needs and the wants of those directly involved. You better know that. If you don't, you got to re-listen to my content. Aftercare. I'm going to be quiet. Those appropriate and helpful acts of counseling, personal and or written contact that come after the funeral. Now, I've worked at a funeral home where they actually sent out these beautifully made cards just to check in on the family. It was one of the nicest things I've seen a funeral home do. Highly suggest, if you run one, I would love for more people to do that. Now, I just want to make it clear, I do have people that one of Jewish faith and one who is Muslim who is going to assist me on doing a Muslim episode and a Jewish episode. So please, I apologize for mispronouncing and sounding like an absolute dork. Bear with me. AL-GHUSL and in parentheses, Gasul. I'm so sorry. Like my teacher at Gupton, they didn't even try. So I really, truly do not know how to pronounce that. So I'm going to try. Gasul. My friend will teach me. Anyway, a practical and ceremonial washing of deceased Muslim. You will need to know that. So please remember the spelling at the very least and listen to my Muslim episode because the faiths like Hinduism, Roman Catholic, liturgical, non-liturgical, Jewish is big, and believe it or not, Muslim's big. So you really, when I put those episodes out, you need to listen to those, okay? And I'll do them right, because I want you to know the right info. Moving on. Alkaline hydrolysis. Commit this one too, because if you win the lottery, not saying anything. The reduction of a dead human body to essential elements through a water-based dissolution process using alkaline chemicals, heat, agitation, and pressure to accelerate natural decomposition. The processing of the hydrolyzed remains after removal from the alkaline hydrolysis vessel, placement of the processed remains in a placement of the processed remains in a hydrolyzed container, there we go, and release of the hydrolyzed remains into an appropriate part. Alkaline hydrolysis is a form of final disposition. Allah, in the Islam faith, the name for their God, or God. Altar, an elevated place or structure on which sacrifices are offered, at which religious rites are performed. In the Christian faith, it is a table on which the Eucharist or Holy Communion is offered. Alternative container, An unfinished wood box or other non-metal receptacle or enclosure without ornamentation or a fixed interior lining, which is designed for the encasement of human remains and which is made of fiberboard, pressed board, composition materials with or without any outside covering or any like materials. Apostille, certification or legalization of a document for international use in parentheses under terms of the 1961 Hague Convention. Hague. I swear that's how you pronounce it. Archbishop. In the Roman Catholic faith, this is the head of an archdiocese. Remember I told you, got to remember these. Hierarchy is important. They will ask. Aaron. That is a Hebrew meaning container. A casket made entirely of wood with no metal parts. Like, no joke, the nails are wooden. They're wooden pegs. It's so cool. All of it is organic, and they follow that rule of what they are born with, they go with. It's fascinating. All right. Arrangement conference. The meeting between the funeral practitioner and the client family during which funeral arrangements are discussed and may refer to pre-need or at-need situations. At need, when the death has occurred. Bishop, leader of multiple churches in a particular denomination. That's important. In the Roman Catholic faith, the head of a diocese, also important. In the Latter-day Saints faith, the bishop of the ward is the leader of a single congregation. We're mixing it up a little. Gotta know all of these religions, man. Bonds. Know this. This will be, oh my gosh, shut up. The title of a Buddhist priest. Another important one, the Book of Dates. This is a term used in the Buddhist faith to describe a calendar that is used to determine an accurate time for casketing the deceased, services, and the disposition. Brother. In the Roman Catholic faith, a man who is a member of a religious order without being ordained. Brotherhood, relating to a social or religious organization. Burial or interment. The act of placing the dead human body into the ground. Burial transit permit. You might see that as BTP when you work at a funeral home or, in conjunction with. Also known as the disposition permit, a legal document issued by a governmental agency authorizing transportation and or disposition of a dead human body. Calling hours, also known as visitation or visiting hours. Time set aside for friends and relatives to pay their respect for the deceased prior to the funeral service. Cantor, a religious singer who assists the clergy, one who assists the rabbi in the Jewish faith, or one who assists the priest in the Eastern Orthodox faith. So you see, it's not religious exempt, right? It goes across a couple. All right, cardinal. In the Roman Catholic faith, bishops who have the right to participate in a papal election. Cash advance. This is important too. God, I say that too much. I'm sorry. Any item of service or merchandise described to a purchaser as a cash advance, accommodation, cash disbursement, or similar term. Cash advanced item is also any item obtained from a third party and paid for by the funeral provider on the purchaser's behalf. Cash advanced items may include, but are not limited to, the cemetery or crematory services, pallbearers, public transportation, clergy honoraria, flowers, musicians or singers, nurses, obituary notices, gratuities, and death certificates. Casket, a rigid container which is designed for the encasement of human remains and which is usually constructed of wood, metal, fiberglass, plastic, or like metal, and ornamented and lined with fabric. This is the FTC definition, which is the one you want. Casket bearer or pallbearer. one who actively bears or carries the casket during the funeral service and at the committal service. So you'll see them remove the body or remove the casket from the church, put it in the hearse, and then I've seen them ride together in the same car, and they follow the hearse, and they get out, and they also, depending on the situation, the hearse tries to get, sometimes, we've had, I'm not going to get into it. We had one cemetery that was there's news articles. Oh my goodness. I don't want to get into it because I don't know if I can. But there are seriously news articles on this. It's so poorly taken care of, but it's the cheapest cemetery, and it's in a small town, so people go there. And luckily, the news is starting to cover it. Well, it's gotten so bad that, the hearse will have to actually back up, extremely close to the tent. Where the hole is, if you want to, sorry for saying that. But that's what it is. The grave. And thus allowing the pallbearers to more easily do their job, because I've seen them slip. I've seen some things. You will too. And shame on that. And it's that cemetery, and they should not be owned by the people that own them anymore. They're actually owned by somebody in Florida, which explains a lot. So anyway, all right. Cause of death, also known as COD, diseases, injuries, or complications that have resulted in the death. Sorry, I'm flipping through my book. All right, celebrant, a person who designs and officiates a personalized ceremony or rite, the officiant who celebrates the Mass in the Roman Catholic Church. Cemetery, an area of ground set aside and dedicated for the final disposition of dead human remains. Cemetery tent, a portable shelter employed to cover the grave area during the committal. Mentioned that a couple of times in my little side stories. Certified copy of a death certificate. This is a legal copy of the original death certificate. Now, some places, when you're practicing, some places will take a photocopy, if you don't order enough. There are other places like banks, they don't care. They want, even Verizon Wireless, they're going to want a certified, not a photocopy. You might get lucky. There are some, I can't name them. I've seen it, but it's best to just sit there with the family during your arrangement conference and go, it's better to have a couple extra. How many accounts? What do you think you need? All right. Chancel, the portion of the church surrounding the altar, usually enclosing the clergy, the area behind the altar or communion rail. Chapel, a building or designated area of a building in which services are conducted. So, in a funeral home, chapel. Chaplain, a person chosen to conduct religious exercises for the military, an institution, or a fraternal organization. Shevra Kadisha. Huzzah! Got it. Hebrew meaning holy society. A group of men or women who care for the dead. They may be referred to by laymen as washers. In the past, they took care of all funeral arrangements and preparations for Jewish funerals. I'm so proud of myself. Christian burial certificate, also known as the Christian burial permit or priest lines. This is a letter or form from a priest stating the eligibility of the deceased for burial in a Roman Catholic cemetery. And yes, they will deny you. They care. Columbarium, a structure, room, or space in a mausoleum or other building containing niches or recesses used to hold cremated remains. Committal service, that portion of the funeral conducted at the place of disposition of dead human bodies. Common carrier, any carrier required by law to convey passengers or freight without refusal if the approved fare or charge is paid, i.e. airline, train, etc. Coroner, usually an elected officer without medical training whose chief duty is to investigate questionable deaths. Cot, A portable stretcher commonly employed in a transfer vehicle for the moving of the deceased. I hate those so much. Somebody, please, if you are like innovative, invent a better one. Please, all of us are begging you. Please, please, please invent a better cot. Transfer cot. I will love you, and so will like everybody. Anybody. All right. Cremated remains. Yay, they don't say cremains. I told you it's cremated remains. Get that. Make sure that you no longer ever say cremains. If you say that, you hear me telling you I'm going to slap you with a fish. Cremated remains. The result of the reduction of a dead human body to inorganic bone fragments by intense heat. Cremation. The reduction of a dead human body to inorganic bone fragments by intense heat in a specifically designed retort or chamber. Crematory. A furnace or retort for cremating dead human bodies. A building that houses a retort. Cross. A Christian symbol without the corpus. Remember I told you the difference between cross and crucifix? Because they're about to repeat it. Crucifer. Oh, no, they're not. So a cross doesn't have anything on it. It's just the two wooden planks that make a cross. No Jesus. Okay. So, crucifer or cross bearer. One who carries the crucifix or cross during an ecclesiastical procession. Sorry, I can't. My mouth doesn't want to. Crucifix. Oh, there we go. A cross with a figure or image representing the body of Christ or corpus. Crypt. A chamber in a mausoleum of sufficient size, generally used to contain the casketed remains of a deceased person. Deacon. A subordinate officer in a Christian church. Remember that, please. Death certificate. A legal document containing vital statistics, disposition, and final medical information pertaining to the deceased. Death notice. A newspaper item publicizing the death of a person and giving service details. In some parts of the United States can contain the same information as an obituary, Deceased. A dead human body. That's simple. Dentures. False teeth. Easy point. Department of Veterans Affairs, or VA, previously known as Veterans Administration, a federal agency that administers benefits provided for veterans of the armed forces. Diocese. In the Roman Catholic faith, a geographical grouping of parishes under the jurisdiction of a bishop. So, diocese, Roman Catholic faith, under the jurisdiction of a bishop. Remember that, okay? Direct cremation. Disposition of human remains by cremation without any formal viewing, visitation, or ceremony with the deceased present. Now, it gives 16 CFR 453, parenthesis G, parenthesis. Not sure what that means, but it's there. All right. Dismissal. Procedures or invitation intended to facilitate an organized departure. Disposition permit. See burial transit permit. All right, I'm not going back to that because that's a different page. You've got that by now. All right, divine liturgy, liturgical celebration of the Eucharist in Eastern Orthodox churches. And here's that word I hate. Ecclesiastic. Yes, got it. Okay, sorry, I get super excited when I get that in one try. Pertaining to the church or the clergy. Elegy. Song or poem expressing sorrow or lamentation for the dead. Elder. Governing officer of a church, often having pastoral or teaching functions. Specific duties dependent upon various denominations. El Malay Rakamin. Now, I'm going to rely on my Jewish friend for that because that's how it phonetically sounded. In the Jewish faith, a memorial service, literally God full of compassion, usually the last prayer of the funeral service, sometimes referred to as the Malay. Entombment, the placing of remains in a crypt in a mausoleum. Epitaph, a commemorative inscription on a tomb or cemetery marker. Remember that. Same with cenotaph. Escort, a leader or leaders of the procession or guardian of the group, such as a military escort, police escort, etc. Eucharist, the consecrated elements of Holy Communion. Eucharist minister, the layperson sanctioned to administer the Holy Communion and other assigned tasks. The final commendation in the Roman Catholic faith, the ending portion of the funeral mass. That's important. The ending of the funeral mass is the final commendation in the Roman Catholic faith. First call. You should know this. When the funeral establishment receives notification of death. And you should also know how to answer and what not to say. First viewing, or the preview, a private time for the family to view the deceased before public visitation begins. Now, sometimes, if it's been traumatic, some places like I've worked will let family, like very close, like mom or spouse or father, come see that body and make the decision if they want an open casket or not. So I'm going to put that first viewing to me, like I guess stick to the definition, but yeah, let's stick to that. I'm just explaining my own personal viewings, but I'm going to repeat that. First viewing or preview, a private time for the family to view the deceased before public visitation begins. Okay? That's what you want to know. Forwarding remains. One of the categories required to be itemized on the GPL, the general price list, if the funeral provider offers this service. This involves services of the funeral provider in the locale where the death occurs and preparation for transfer to another funeral provider as selected by the family or consumer. Funeral rule requires package pricing of this service with a description of the components included. Foyer, also narthex or vestibule, the entryway into a church, funeral establishment, or other public building, the entrance hall. Fraternal, relating to a social organization. Funeral coach or hearse, specialty vehicle designed to transfer casketed remains. Funeral procession, the movement of vehicles from the place of the funeral to the place of disposition. All right. Funeral rites, any funeral event performed. Funeral service, the rites held at the time of disposition of human remains, with the deceased present. Gatha, the first two and the last two. So remember, first two, last two, verses of a Buddhist hymn that is sung at the funeral service. So Gatha, first two, last two, Buddhist hymn. Okay? Can't make it much easier. All right, GPL, general price list, a printed list of goods and services offered for sale by funeral providers with retail prices. The GPL is considered the keystone of the funeral rule. Genuflect, the act of bending the right knee as an indication of reverence or as an act of humility. All right, it's repeating a couple, so I'm going to skip. Gratuity, a gift or small sum of money tendered or tip for service provided. Grave, an excavation in the earth as a place for interment space. Graveside service, a ceremony or ritual, religious or otherwise. My goodness, let me try that again. Graveside service, a ceremony or ritual, religious or otherwise, conducted at the grave. Grave straps, webbing or similar material used for lowering the casket into the grave. And gosh, those things can snap. It's scary. Green burial, you'll need to know everything about green burials because they'll throw those at you. But they're easy. Like I can say with green burial, don't stress, use common sense. Like what you know about like ecological stuff and being green, use that. All right, green burial. Disposition without the use of toxic chemicals or any materials that are not readily biodegradable. See? Green cemetery, a place of interment that bans the use of metal caskets, toxic embalming, and concrete vaults, and may also require the use of aesthetically natural monuments. See what I'm talking about? Just easy peasy. Guaranteed contract. An agreement where the funeral establishment promises that the services and merchandise will be provided at the time of need for a sum not exceeding the original amount of the contract plus any accruals, regardless of the current prices associated with providing the services and the merchandise at the time of the funeral. You want to know the difference between the contract types, okay? Hearse. See funeral coach. We all know what the hearse is, right? carries the casket to and from. All right. Hesped. A eulogy or true evaluation of the deceased life that is part of a Jewish funeral service. Holy water. Water that is blessed by a priest. Home funeral. One that takes place within the residence of the deceased, as was commonly done in the United States until the mid-20th century. Honorarium. Compensation or recognition for service performed. Honorary casket bearers, honorary pallbearers. Friends of the family or members of an organization or group who act as an escort or honor guard for the deceased. They do not carry the casket. Humanist funeral. A funeral rite that is in essence devoid of religious connotation. Icon. In the Eastern Orthodox faith, a holy picture, usually mosaic or painted on wood. Do not confuse that with the following. Iconostasis. The partition that extends across the front of the Eastern Orthodox Church, separating the sanctuary from the cella. Very different things. Imam. In the Islam faith, the leader of the local congregation. All right, flipping my page. Excuse me for just a second here. Lots of words. All right, immediate burial. Disposition of human remains by burial, without formal viewing, visitation, or ceremony with the deceased present, except for graveside service. And we've got this 16 CFR period 5 or 453.1 in parentheses K. Informant. One who supplies vital statistics, information about the deceased. Initial notification of death, the first contact a funeral establishment receives regarding a death. Inter, to bury in the ground. Interment, see burial. Inurnment, placing cremains in an urn or placing cremated remains. They said cremains. Placing cremated remains in an urn or placing cremated remains in a niche or grave. All right. Irrevocable contract. An agreement for future funeral services which cannot be terminated or canceled prior to the death of the beneficiary. Remember, all these contracts, they matter. You might not get them all, but you might get the one where you're like, what? Islam, the religion of Muslims that began at the time of Muhammad. Muslims believe that Islam stands for purity, peace, submission to God or Allah's will, and obedience to his laws. Janazah, the Islam faith, the funeral or funeral prayer. Kaddish, in the Jewish faith, a prayer recited for the deceased by the direct mourners, parents, siblings, spouse, and children, for the few first time at the conclusion of the interment service. It is subsequently recited by children for parents at every service for 11 months and on Yorzeits. All other categories of mourners have the obligation to say the Kaddish for 30 days. Kafan. You need to know this. Burial garments utilized by Muslims. You need to know all the burial garments for all religions, okay? I'm just going to let you know that now. All right, kin. One's blood relatives. Both legally, the surviving spouse is not kin, okay? All right, Kingdom Hall. This is the worship facility for Jehovah's Witnesses. Kippah, or yarmulke. In the Jewish faith, the skull cap worn by males at temple at funeral services. Kneeler, prayer rail, or like I've said before, prie-dieu. A small bench placed in front of the casket or the urn to allow a person to kneel for prayer. Quran, the holy book of the Islamic faith as revealed to Muhammad by the angel Gabriel. Kriya, Hebrew term meaning rending or tearing, a symbol of grief, a tear in the upper corner of the garment, or a tear on a symbolic ribbon which is worn by the survivors. The last kiss, physical contact with the deceased and the icon during the final pass by the casket. Leveya, in the Jewish faith, the funeral procession. Liturgical, Eucharist-centered worship, a prescribed order or form of worship specific to a particular denomination which will have the Eucharist or Holy Communion as its central element. Lot, a subdivision in a cemetery which consists of several graves or interment spaces. Lowering device, which is a godsend, a mechanical device used to lower a casket into the ground. Makura Gayo, traditionally in the Buddhist faith, I know that's a typo. A beside prayer, which may now be performed by the bonds just before funeral arrangements are made. Now, I'm Buddhist, so I'm happy to be able to do the Buddhist stuff. Manner of death, the mode of death such as an accident, homicide, natural, suicide, or unknown. All right. Mosque, local Islamic religious facility containing no icons, statues, symbols, pews, chairs, or musical instruments. Mass, the liturgical celebration of the Eucharist in the Roman Catholic Church. Mass card, of the written request for a mass for a specific intention. Mausoleum, a building containing crypts or vaults for entombment. Mecca, the holiest city in the Islamic faith. Muslims are buried facing this city. Medical examiner, a forensically trained physician who investigates questionable or unattended deaths and has replaced the coroner in some jurisdictions. I actually work for one of the coroners in South Carolina, so he has not been replaced. All right. Memorial book, aka register book, a book signed by those attending a visitation service. A memorial folder or service folder, a pamphlet made available at the funeral service giving details about the deceased and the funeral arrangements. Memorial gathering, a scheduled assembly of family and friends following a death without the deceased present. Memorial park, a cemetery or section of a cemetery with only flush to the ground type markers. Memorial service, this you should know, funeral rites without remains present. Menorah, in the Jewish faith, a candelabrum with a central stem bearing 7 candles, the oldest symbol in Judaism. Military escort, military personnel assigned to accompany remains following an active duty death. Mogen David, also Star of David. In the Jewish faith, a hexagram formed by the combination of 2 triangles may be called the Jewish star. It symbolizes a new hope for the Jewish people. All right, Muhammad, a prophet of the Islamic religion born in 571 CE, considered by Muslims to be God's messenger, but he is not worshipped or considered divine. So not quite like our Jesus, I guess. Monsignor, an honorary title conferred upon a Roman Catholic priest. Muslim, the name given to a member of the Islamic faith. Mosque, and they give a different spelling for it, so we're gonna skip over the next couple because it repeats. National Cemetery, a cemetery created and maintained under an act of Congress for burial of veterans of military service and their eligible family members. Nave, the seating or auditorium section of a church. Niche, a recess or space in a columbarium used for the permanent placing of cremated remains. Nirvana, the Buddhist idea of heavenly peace or pure land. Non-guaranteed contract, agreement in which the funeral establishment promises to apply the amount prepaid plus any accruals to the balance due. However, the cost of the funeral will be based upon the current price for services and merchandise at time of death occurs. Okay. Non-liturgical, aka centered worship. That's important to remember. A form or order of worship which has the scriptures as its central element. Actual form of order of the worship service is left to the discretion of each individual church and or the minister. Nun or sister. In the Roman Catholic faith, a woman who is a member of a religious order, especially one bound by vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Obituary. Traditionally, a news item concerning the death of a person which usually contains a biographical sketch. It can appear in media other than newspapers, such as online sources and service programs. It's sometimes used interchangeably with death notice or funeral notice. They're becoming more popular since this was written, becoming more popular to post it on Facebook too. All right, officiant, one who conducts or leads a service or ceremony. Outer burial container, any container designed for placement in the grave around the casket, including containers commonly known as burial vaults, grave boxes, and grave liners. A pagoda, this is the Buddhist place of worship. Pall, P-A-L-L, not the name. A symbolic cloth placed over the casket. Pall bearer or casket bearer. See casket bearer. I'm not going back. I apologize. Panchita, a rubric for the Eastern Orthodox funeral service. Peristas or peristasis, the watch or all-night vigil of the deceased in the Eastern Orthodox community. Paschal candle. In the Roman Catholic faith, a candle placed near the casket during the funeral mass that signifies the everlasting light of Christ. Pastor. One having spiritual care over a number of people. Perpetual care. An arrangement made by the cemetery whereby funds are set aside, the income from which is used to maintain the cemetery indefinitely. The Pope, the head of the Roman Catholic Church and the Bishop of Rome. Prayer card, a card with the name of the decedent and prayer or verse, which may or may not include the dates of birth and death. All right, we're going to go over, all right. Pre-funded funeral arrangements made in advance of need that include provisions for funding or prepayment. Pre-planned funeral arrangements. These are funeral arrangements made in advance of need that do not include provisions for funding or prepayment. All right, we're going to just skip over all the things we've done. Priest, a title conferred to clergy upon ordination in various religions. Private carrier, those who transport only in particular instances and only for those who they choose to contract with. For example, funeral establishment, vehicles, and livery. Procession and processional. The movement in an orderly fashion at the beginning of a service. Rabbi, a teacher or ordained leader in the Jewish faith. Reader, in the Church of Christ scientist, one authorized to read the lessons and scriptures. Let me flip my page here. All right. Receiving remains. One of the categories required to be itemized on the GPL if the funeral provider offers this service. This involves services of the funeral provider after initial services have been provided by another firm at the locale of death. Funeral rule requires package pricing of the service with a description of the components included as always, right? Receiving vault, a structure designed for the temporary storage of bodies not to be immediately interred. Recession or recessional, the movement in an orderly fashion at the end of a service. All right, we're going to skip that. Retort, the burning chamber in a crematory, also referred to as the cremator, the total mechanical unit for the cremation process. Revocable contract, an agreement which may be terminated by the purchaser at any time prior to the death of the beneficiary with a refund of monies paid on the contract as prescribed by state law. Rosary beads, a chain of adjoining beads and a crucifix used as an aid in the recitation of prayers. Rosary prayers, a series of prayers in the Roman Catholic faith. Rosary service, a service at which rosary prayers are recited. Royal doors, doors in the center of the iconostasis leading directly to the altar. Only ordained clergy are to go through these doors. Never cross on the cella in front of the royal doors. Rubrics. In liturgical churches, stated directions in a prayer book or liturgical manual regarding the order of service as approved by the denomination. Sacrament of the sick. You will probably see this. In the Roman Catholic faith, a sacrament given to those seriously ill or in danger of death to prepare their souls for eternity. Sanctuary, the part of the church surrounding the altar. This is inside the chancel. All right, scapular. In the Roman Catholic faith, a piece of cloth or metal having religious significance worn around the neck. Section, the largest subdivision of a cemetery. Service folder, says see memorial folder. Service of encasketing. In the Buddhist faith, a service performed as a part of casketing the deceased. There's more to that. It's very interesting, and you could probably find a video of it. It's very cool to watch. I have been to one. All right, sexton, one who is in charge of the cemetery, the caretaker of a church. Shabbat, the Jewish Sabbath, begins at sundown Friday and ends at sundown Saturday. Shavah, in the Jewish faith, a 7-day mourning period. Sholoshim, meaning 30 in the Jewish faith, the 30-day mourning period. Shomer, in the Jewish faith, a watcher, one who sits with the deceased reading I can't say this word, Psalms, Psalms until burial. I think I got it. Shroud, a cloth or garment in which a dead person is wrapped or dressed for burial. Sign of the cross, a symbolic sign of the cross made with the right hand. Social Security Administration, a branch of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which provides benefits for retirement, survivors, and disability, and includes Supplemental Security, SSI, and Medicare. Celia, in the Eastern Orthodox Church, the open area, sometimes raised before the altar. Survivor or survivors, one who outlives another person or event. Synagogue, a place of religious worship in the Jewish faith, may also be referred to as a temple or shul. Takrikim, a hand-sewn white linen shroud in which the deceased members of the Jewish faith are dressed. Tahara, in the Jewish faith, the ceremonial washing of washing the deceased before the burial, a ritual purification or cleansing of the deceased which should be performed by a Shevra Kadisha. Talith, a prayer shawl worn by Jewish males during the morning prayer service. Tehillim, in the Jewish faith, prayers said before the funeral by a group of friends and the shomer. These prayers come from the book of Psalms. Temple clothing, garments worn by endowed members of the Latter-day Saints and temple and for burial. You need to know that. Temple ordinances, ceremonial instructions of the Latter-day Saints Church, given only within a temple to worthy members of the sect. Temporary container, a receptacle for cremated remains, usually made of cardboard, plastic, or similar materials designed to hold cremated remains until an urn, other permanent container is acquired, or other disposition is made. Third-party contracts, agreements which involve the funeral practitioner or funeral establishment because the family being served has contracted with someone else, or also a third party, for services or merchandise also available from the funeral establishment, like caskets, vaults, urns, pre-need insurance, etc. Tomb, a general term designating those places suitable for the reception of a dead human body. Transepts, wings of the main part of the church, which may serve as small chapels for baptism, weddings, and even small funeral services. Transfer of remains. See the moving of the dead human body from form. No, that's a typo. Okay, we're going to skip that one because we've already done that in a different definition, and that's a bad typo. Transfer vehicle, the automobile generally used for transporting the uncasketed dead human body from the place of death to the mortuary. All right. We've already done that. Trust account established by one individual to be held for by the benefit of another as a method of payment of funeral expenses. Creates a fiduciary responsibility. Money paid to a funeral establishment for future payment of funeral expenses. Trust account. An account established by one individual to be held by the benefit of another as a method of payment for funeral expenses. It creates a fiduciary responsibility. Money paid to a funeral establishment for future services is placed in an account with the funeral establishment as a trustee for the benefit of another. Urn, permanent container for cremated remains meant for decorative or inurnment purposes. All right. Vestments, ritual garments worn by the clergy. Veteran, one who has served a prescribed period of time with the armed forces and who is no longer an active member of said armed forces. Vigil or vigil service, wake service, a prayer or scripture service usually held at the funeral establishment the evening before the funeral. Vigil lights. I think we already did this one. In the Roman Catholic faith, set of 2 candles that may be placed, one at the head and one at the foot in the casket during the visitation period. All right. Vital statistics. Data concerning birth, marriage, divorce, sickness, and death. Wake. Historically, a watch kept over the deceased, an all-night vigil. Wake service, also, we've already done that. Ward, group of Latter-day Saints members sharing familial, linguistic, or cultural characteristics. Words of appreciation, a brief expression of gratitude to the congregation for their presence at the Buddhist service. Yarzit, in the Jewish faith, the anniversary of the death. Yizkor, in the Jewish faith, a memorial service recited 4 times a year. Oh my goodness. That's it for that. That was a lot. I'm so sorry because I know that my mouth did not want to do that anymore. But we did it. So, I want to remind you guys, anything that I mispronounced, anything that wasn't well done with the Jewish or Muslim religions, I really am putting together a great script for my friends to help me with, and we will be doing that over the next 2 weeks. Saturday is the Jewish one. I got to get together with my Muslim friend because she actually lives in Egypt, so the time difference is a little weird. But no, we're going to get this, and we're going to do it, and it's going to be done right. And I want you guys to be able to know these words, and I want you to know the significance, and I want to do it right. I'm sorry, I just don't want to read the study guide. I want to make sure I do it right. So, anywho, if you have your NBE coming up, I wish you all the luck in the world. Good luck. I'm here for you. Every single person listening to this podcast is here for you. We are all rooting for you. You've got this. Sit down with confidence and a smile on your face. Laugh at those goofy, and you'll see them. Laugh at those so goofy potential answers to questions, and be confident. Fly through that sucker, because I know you will. And don't be afraid to go back and double check, because I had people tell me not to do that, and I gotta tell you, I saved myself by doing that. So You know your stuff. I'm proud of you. I believe in you. And honestly, with arts, we've covered, in my opinion, all of the, except for the religion. Like, we're getting there. But, like, with all the other stuff, I gotta tell you, you should be pretty okay. You've got FTC, you've got cremation, you've got funeral service, business law. I think you're gonna be doing just good. And grief counseling. I mean, you're gonna be doing great. So have ye little faith in yourself. Be confident, no stress, breathe, and I hope you do well. And as always, I can't wait until you tune in for my next episode, and I cannot wait until y'all get to start seeing my actual live YouTube videos and get to see me and see my awful drawings. Maybe my cats will make an appearance. I'm honestly super excited to do that. So, you know, it'll be a fun counterpart. So anyway, you guys have a wonderful day or night, whatever it is. It is midnight. I am going to go turn on a movie, have some tea, and pass out. So I'll talk to y'all later. You guys take care. Thanks again.